software quality still matters. In a world where AI is being used more and more heavily and people are tempted to ship products that haven't been thoroughly tested, we see quality slipping all over the place. Windows had a terrible 2025 where their fixes seemed to cause more problems than they solved. GitHub stopped sharing their uptime percentages, and countless sites were launched and then crashed because of exploits and obvious errors. But does quality really matter if you can just have an AI push out a quick fix? Well, absolutely. But let's look at why software quality is even more important than you might think. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Tim Corey, and I train developers of all levels to be better at their craft. This channel has over 900 training videos, including 6 full training courses. I also provide training at iamtimcorey.com that is paid. The proceeds of those sales directly fund more free content like this. And if you want to be a truly skilled developer, I can help. Now, let's talk about software quality. I grew up in a time where we always talked about SLAs, or service level agreements, and the 5 nines of availability. That's kind of the holy grail of SLA, where we got 5 nines of availability. But let's talk about that. So here I have the 5 nines of availability. So we have uptime, and this is the nines, right? So 90% uptime would be 1 9 of availability. Now, 99% is 2 nines. 99.999 is 5 nines. But what does that mean when it comes to over the course of a year? Well, we can see here that if we have just 1 9 availability, that's 35 days and 12 hours of downtime. That's what, every 12 days or so, or even more than that, every 11 days, you have a full day of downtime. That's a problem. Now, that's not how downtime works. It doesn't just take 1 day off and count that. It might be an hour here, 2 hours there, and so on, but 90% is terrible. When you actually look at it from a year perspective, you have 35 days where your app is fully non-responsive. That's a problem. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, 99.999%, well, that means you have 5.3 minutes, not 5:53, 5.3 minutes of total downtime for the entire year. That's not much. It's 5 minutes, 18 seconds, I think, something like that. Well, that's not much. How do you do that? Well, that's where we talk about things like having hot swap in Azure for our websites, where we deploy to a site that's not yet running. We get that other site up and running, we test it, we make sure everything's up and live and running, and we swap those 2 sites so that our users never see any downtime. Because just updating your site where your site may be down for a couple of minutes, well, you can only do that a couple of times a year in order to still maintain your 5 nines of availability. Now, 5 nines of availability is really hard to do. It's very, very expensive to do, and companies don't like to guarantee that because of the fact of how expensive it is to do. And companies that are paying for that don't love to pay for it because that's a much higher price tag, because there's so many things that have to go into those percentages. Now, I do want to come back to these nines of availability in just a minute, but first, let's go over and look at a couple of different sites and their availability. Let's start with OpenAI. This is OpenAI's status page, status.openai.com. And you can see, now this is for December through March. Today is March 4th. So we refresh to make sure it's March 4th data. But you can see here, it says 99.75%, 98.86% for ChatGPT. Now, of course, there's different components in here, and this is where it gets kind of tough, because you say, well, yes, but like some components weren't down that much. Well, yes, but they all kind of add up to the overall ChatGPT. We're going to talk more about that adding up in a minute, but let's just start looking at what this downtime really means. So let's look at our ChatGPT, which we have 1.14% of downtime. So 0.114 of downtime equals just over 4 days of downtime a year. 4 days a year where the service is unavailable. That's not great. When we talk about nines of availability, we've got 1. Now we're close to the second one, but we don't have it. So it's 1 9 availability. The APIs have 2 nines of availability, and Sora actually has 3 nines, almost 4 nines, which is great. But ChatGPT, the most commonly used thing, well, that's down to 1 9 of availability. It's not great. So let's look now at Claude, a competitor. Now, again, this is as of March 4th, so they had an outage recently. But let's look at what Claude has. We can pull this back up so we're ready. First of all, Claude Government hasn't been up for 90 days. It's only been up for a few days, and yet they already had some outages. So Claude for Government is a 99.75% uptime, even though they've had quite a bit of downtime because of the fact that, well, it's only been down for 29 minutes, but they've only been up for a few days. So that's not something you really look at and compare, but they've not had great uptime even that little bit of time. But let's look at a few of these others. For example, we've got Claude AI, 99.32. So that means that they're up for 0.0, and then let's just say 0.07. So 0.7%. So that's 2.5 days of downtime a year for Claude AI. So when you look at the Claude API, it's not much different. It's we can do 6. So it's 2.19 days of downtime per year. That's a lot of downtime. It may not seem like much. You're saying, oh, it's only a couple days per year. That's a big deal. Again, SLAs, which companies typically sign with other companies saying, hey, we're depending on you, therefore you need to give us a certain number of nines. Again, companies want to see 5 nines. They don't want to pay for it, they want to see it. But they really don't want to see you say, well, we're going to give you 2 nines or 1, almost 2 nines availability. That's not a good number, not for something you depend on. Now let's go look at GitHub. GitHub stopped publishing their uptime percentages. I think we can see why. This is the missing GitHub status page. Someone actually went through, and you can actually come down here and look at how they calculate and why, etc. But this is the GitHub platform. And if you look, 92.14% uptime in the past 90 days. So we say days, I'm calculating for a year if they were to maintain this rate. But this is over 90 days. So that percentage means that a lot more downtime. But let's just calculate over a year. And so with this, we're looking at just less than 8%. It's like 7 let's just 7.2. It's close, right? I'm sorry, 7.8. There we go. So just under 8%. That's 28.47 days, 28 and a half days of downtime a year. 28 days based upon this availability right now. And if you notice, look, a lot of yellow, some major red ones as well. Yes, there's some green, but not much. You want to see green like this, where it's lots of green. Now, if you notice, again, the platform is a compilation of all the different things that go into the platform. This is a per component. And again, mostly green, 99.49%. But what happens is these all add up to this overall GitHub platform percentage, which is terrible. Okay, so my goal here is not to dog on any one product, but what I want to point out is that right now, software quality is slipping. This would not have been acceptable a few years ago. But this is a very common thing now from even the makers of AI. So OpenAI, Claude, and then GitHub, which is owned by Microsoft, which has been pushing AI everywhere. Even the makers of AI have gotten worse and worse and worse in their code quality, which leads to downtime. But why is this so important? And why do we even look at this 92% when really we could say, well, it's 99.49% and it's 99.49% and 99.35%. No, it's not. It's 92.14 because these various things add up to this. Let me explain why. So let's take our percentages here. We'll just put them over the corner, and let's talk about your app. Okay, so we're gonna draw this app. Let's make it white, and we're gonna say your app. Okay, so this is your app, and let's make this a little smaller. There we go. So this is your app. Now your app has some dependencies. Let's just put them in place for right now. So first of all, let's put a couple of dependencies on your app itself. Let's do, well, we've got our payment system. You depend on that. If your payment system goes down, your app is really down, right? Like your app has an outage. Now let's also talk about your email system or emailer. This is where you send out emails to customers saying, hey, we got your order. Hey, there's been a delay. Hey, your order's been shipped. Here's your tracking number, etc. If that goes down, you've got a problem because you can't confirm orders, etc. So that's downtime too. And then we have, another system. Let's say you got your payment system, you got your email system. There's probably another system or two in here. Any other dependencies. Okay, that could be anything, but let's just say one more thing, right? Well, it doesn't matter what it is. Okay, now we're going to deploy our app to a cloud provider. But if the cloud provider goes down, your app is down, right? And then to deploy your app, you're going to use some kind of DevOps process. But if your DevOps process is down, you can't push new updates, which means your app can't be updated, which means if you have a problem, you're down again. And then you're also going to have, you're probably using some kind of coding AI. And if that coding AI goes down, then you can't write code anymore, which is a problem. I think you should be able to do it without the AI. But that stops you from pushing new code. So what we have here is a very simple system. Okay, this is very simple. There's so many more things that your app probably depends on. In fact, I know there is because if you go and look at if you have a C# application, look at your NuGet packages. How many things does it depend on? Now, a lot of those things are things that are not necessarily changing that often, but imagine for a minute that you depend on, leftpad for JavaScript, and then the leftpad npm package goes away. All of a sudden, you can't build your app, which means you can't deploy your app, which means you can't get new versions out there. That happened, and it crashed a whole section of the internet because one dependency went away. Well, if one dependency crashes or one dependency has a bug that stops it from working, that can cause downtime as well. But this is a very simple version. Yes, you need to, if you're a web application, you need a payment system, you need an emailer, etc. We're not even talking about connecting to a warehousing system. So actually, interfacing with your warehouse to send the packages, etc. But these are very basic things that a very small app would depend on. Now, let's say for a minute that you have an uptime of 99%. Okay, that's your uptime for your application itself. Let's forget for a minute everything else. Your code has very few bugs. It has very few things that cause a crash. When you actually send code up, maybe once in a while you cause something to go down, or you don't have a good DevOps process So you're taking a site down to do updates before you're pushing it back up. Therefore, you have 2 nines of availability. You have 3 days and 15 hours of downtime a year between all of your maintenance windows and app crashes that cause problems to roll things back, etc. So with that, you have 3.5 roughly days of downtime. Okay, just because of your app, right? Let's put this in red. So your app has 3.5 days of downtime, but maybe your payment system is just like you. And let's say it is. So it has a 99% uptime, 3.5 days of downtime a year. And your email service, 99% uptime. And your other dependencies, let's just say all of them combined have another 99% uptime. Maybe that's your warehousing system or whatever. Your cloud provider has a 99% uptime. Your DevOps has a 99% uptime. And your coding AI, which as we saw over here, 98%. Over here, it was 99.3, 99.4, 99.5. We're in the ballpark here of 99%. So all these systems, let's just say they all have a 99 or 2 nines availability, which is better than GitHub has right now. It's better than OpenAI has right now. It's about the same as what Claude has or a little bit worse. Okay? So with that, if all of these systems have a 99% uptime, does your app itself, the overall app, have a 99% uptime? No, it does not. And here's why. Because do these downtimes overlap? Well, you have a 1% chance of it overlapping between two of them, because this is 1% of the year. This is 1% of the year. So most likely they won't overlap, which is what we're seeing in this GitHub platform. We have a whole bunch of yellow and red, but look down here, we don't have as much yellow and red. It's just they don't overlap as much. Now, connected systems tend to. So you'll see some things like API requests and issues have major outages that look like they're the same day. January 15th and January 15th. Yep. And it's the same time frame. So it's probably the same issue. So overlapping systems will have overlapping issues. But if you come back up here, none of these things really overlap. Your payment system doesn't overlap with your app itself, probably, or your email system, or your warehouse dependency, or anything else, or your cloud provider, maybe. Although if was it East US 1 for AWS, if that goes down, that may affect your payment system, your emailer, and your cloud provider, and your DevOps. So yes, there may be some overlap, but for the most part, these aren't going to overlap, which means that you have to add each of these 3.5 days of downtime up and total them, which means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If we do 7 times 3.5, we get 24 and a half days of downtime. So our uptime is what? So if we do 365 divided by 24.5, we're at 14.9% downtime, which means, let's say 15%, which means we're at 85% uptime. So because we have these dependencies, our overall uptime is 85% uptime. Okay, so that's a problem. Because these things add together, again, we're doing back of the napkin math here. It's probably more like 87 to 88%, but 85% is a rough number that we can kind of back up and agree that's probably close. So with just this simple system, with 2 nines of availability for each different system or subsystem we depend on, we get an 85% overall uptime for our application, because Our user does not care if our app is down or if our cloud provider is down. They don't care if we can't push new features out because DevOps is broken. They don't care if our coding AI is down or if our payment system is down. All they care is, I can't buy your widget. So these uptimes accumulate. Or downtimes actually, they accumulate, which means that if your business depends on, let's just say, OpenAI, and it has a 98.86% uptime, and then you add that to your cloud, maybe your DevOps system, which has a 92% uptime, those things probably don't overlap. So now you're looking at is you're in the 80s already with just a couple of services that you depend on, which means that your application is looked at as a poorly performing application when you really only can control your app for the most part. So everything else is somebody else's problem, but it's also becomes your problem because it causes your downtime. Your customers don't care that it's your cloud provider that went down. All they know is your app isn't available. So this is why software quality matters and why just letting the AI write code for you that's close enough isn't good enough. And this is where people push back using the term like slop, AI slop. And yeah, that's what's happening. But it's not just it causes people to get frustrated or it causes, wonky problems once in a while. No, this not only causes major issues for your site, but the cumulative effect of all the systems you depend on also doing this can really cause some major issues where your app is just not available. And that's a problem. So we don't want to have uptime of 85%. We don't want to have uptime of just 90%. We want to be in the 3 nines or more of uptime, but that really takes a lot of work, and it takes looking at all of these systems and saying, how can I make sure that I have those 3 nines even of uptime? And that means maybe changing your DevOps system. It may mean changing your cloud provider or your hosting provider. It may mean swapping out which payment provider you use or any number of other things to ensure you have the best uptime possible. And what it's really going to come down to, I think, is does the code you depend on, is it written by AI or written by humans? Because more and more we're seeing that if it's written by AI, then your uptime goes down, 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 and that's a problem. So I encourage you to think about not just your uptime, which may be at your app, maybe at 99%, but your customer's experience, 85% uptime. So code quality matters in your entire stack, not just your application. I would encourage you to value code quality, put checks in place. Don't just say, hey, AI, don't make any mistakes. You need to know what the code is that's being written. You need to validate it. You make sure that it's bug-free. You need to be responsible because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's the AI's fault or not if your customers go away. All right. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.